Welcome, everybody. I am Lloyd Auerbach, aka Professor Paranormal, and welcome to another episode of Ask Professor Paranormal. Hopefully, you've all come with your questions tonight. We'll see. I can see a few people have already kind of popped in the chat a little bit. So good to see Tony. I can see Lucas. Hi, Paul. Welcome. I know there are a few other folks here as well. And tonight, as general, well, let's see, Lucas, you've got storms. Oh, yeah, I hope you make it through. I do hope you make it through. That's always a kind of a crazy weather thing without a basement, especially. We fortunately don't have, well, we don't have tornadoes here where I live. Hang on one second. I'm going to turn off a speaker here for a second because apparently I'm a little echoey. Let's go ahead and do that. Oops. Let me see if I can actually do this here. All right, I'm trying to, there we go. All right, hopefully, Mike, that's a little bit better. So welcome, everybody. Anyway, I'm sorry, we don't really get tornadoes here in the Bay Area. Water spouts, from what I understand, once in a while, but you know, we always have to worry about earthquakes if they actually happen. There was even one last week, not too far from me, but we didn't feel it at all. So nothing like what's happened in Southeast Asia at this point. So, and hello to everybody who's just joined. For those of you, it looks like, I think I've got people who've been here before in general, but of course the format is you put your questions or topics into the chat, and I am very happy to address them as best I can, or to refer you to other things as well. And speaking of that, I do want to mention that, and I've mentioned this before, but the Rhine Research Center is currently having, in its 90th year, it's the 90th anniversary of the founding of the Duke Parapsychology Lab by J.B. and Louisa Rhine in 1935. And there's many things that are happening through the Rhine in terms of online activities. There's also, if you're in the Durham, North Carolina area, or North Carolina in general, there's stuff going on in person as well. And in essence, the Rhine is doing kind of like monthly lectures and then some special events as well. So I'm putting a link in right now to a new YouTube channel. It's the new Rhine YouTube channel. There are some kind of sample lectures from past lecturers, but there is a specific playlist, which is the Rhine at 90. And one of the initial videos for that was a discussion between myself, because I'm president of the board of directors, and John Kruth, who is the executive director and research director, just talking about the history of the Rhine and just talking about what's going on with it right now. So, and then there was a really great lecture about the kind of evolution of parapsychology through the Rhine Center, through Duke Parapsychology, and so on, by Mitch Horowitz, who's an award-winning author. That was last Friday, and that video is in there as well. So please do take advantage. We'll be adding more videos as time goes on, and eventually the Rhine Center will have its video library back up. We've had some problems with that, but there's well over 100 videos of lectures from some really great people. And speaking of great people, I do want to say also that a couple of the videos, I think there's one video I'm trying to, if you go to the Taste of Rhine speakers, oops, let me cut that. There is a video with Charlie Tart. It was done last spring. Charles Tart is a luminary in the field of parapsychology. He passed away very recently, and it's really a loss to the field. Charlie has been around the field since the early 1960s. He was also well known for writing quite a bit and doing a lot of research on altered states of consciousness in general. But he did work on out-of-body experiences and a number of things. And frankly, he was also one of the most personable people I've ever met, and had a lot of really great memories of lunches with him and just sitting down and talking with him. And the line he used at a parapsychology convention to kind of shut down some criticism of those of us who were using Ghostbusters as a way in to the general public by just reminding everybody that the ability to laugh at yourself is a sure sign of maturity. It actually shut all the criticism down. So take a look at the video with Charlie, because it's also really exciting. All right, so please go ahead and feel free to and jump in with any questions you've got or anything going on. We will be launching our new courses for the Rhine Center. They'll be starting the beginning of May. And I'm trying to remember exactly when. We should have those classes up on our Rhine Education Center site this week. They should go up by the end of the week if you want to register for them. So I just put the link in there as well. The classes I'm teaching one on an 8-week class on the science of ESP, kind of looking at the research and the findings. Most importantly, what have we learned about extrasensory perception as well? And then I'm also teaching a course on the evolution of field investigations from Artemidorus, who did one of the first recorded ghost investigations back in 2,000 years ago, to where we are today. And then there's a couple other classes, one of which is on remote viewing. Paul Smith is teaching a 4-week class. He was one of the Stargate remote viewers. He's teaching a great class on doing remote viewing. And then we have somebody special coming in and talking about music and its relationship to psi, to ESP, to psychokinesis, to psychic phenomena in general. So that, from what I understand, is going to be a really fun class. All right, Lucas, have you ever gotten the heebie-jeebies while investigating the paranormal? Or is it all pretty matter-of-fact for you? Yeah, I hate to say it's a little more matter-of-fact to me over the years. It's gotten over the years. When something happens, though, I will say, to me, it's very cool. I mean, I have never gotten what you might call the heebie-jeebies because of activity or what might happen. I have gotten them because of certain individual living people whose cases I was going into, or homes I was going into. And sometimes a couple of the locations, they were not in the best structural sound setup. So that's where I've had some issues, but never because of the phenomena. It's always been, when stuff happens, it's always really kind of cool to me for that. Otherwise, yeah, it is pretty matter of fact. Have you read Anthony Peake book? I actually just got Anthony Peake's book not too long ago, and it's sitting on my to-read pile, so I haven't read it. But I've read a lot of other stuff by Anthony Peake, and all of his work is really excellent. He's done quite a bit of research and writing on life after death, on not specifically near-death experiences, but survival of bodily death in general. Matt Colburn's new book is called What Lies Beyond. I have not seen that one, so that's one I'll have to take a look at as well. But I got a lot of reading to do, let's put it that way. And speaking of which, I'm hoping by the next session, which I'll be doing on my own without the fancy stuff, on April 13th. That is the next time I'm doing Ask Professor Paranormal. By then, there should be an audiobook of my book, A Paranormal Casebook, available on Amazon. So that should be coming real soon. I'm kind of looking forward to getting that out. All right, so good. I'm glad to see the echoes fixed at this point. So one of the things I do want to say about our courses at the Rhine is, I know some of you have taken classes, and hopefully you'll take more classes. We're always looking for expansion. The whole music and psi thing is a new one. We've done art and psi. Psi, of course, being the 23rd letter of the Greek alphabet, representing psychic phenomena in general. But we're also looking at bringing in other instructors and expanding the Rhine Education Center a bit more. One of the things I'm really happy about is how generally affordable our classes are, and you can do as much or as little in the classes as well. So with any luck, for those of you who have not checked them out, you'll check out some of the classes and decide to possibly take something. I should be teaching a developing or development, kind of a psychic development course in August. I usually do teach that every August. And I may also be teaching a course which should be a book by then. I'm hoping to get that together before the course is offered again, called Presenting the Paranormal to the Public. So I'm working on that at this point. Not for the last 2 weeks, just because we've had a lot of work going on in our house, and I'm even behind in grading the courses I have. So at this point, I've got a lot to catch up on. So, all right. Anybody have anything they want to talk about tonight? Want me to talk about? We'll just kind of leave it here for a moment, because I have something I can bring up too. And while we're waiting, I'll just talk about this. I noticed in the last week or two, there was kind of a, oh, okay, here we go. All right, Mariah, Paranormal Concierge. I know Rogo wrote a book about music in the paranormal. Yeah, I've got that on my shelf. Scott Rogo, D. Scott Rogo. For those of you who don't know the name, look him up on Amazon. There are a few books of his that have been republished. Scott was someone who got heavily involved in parapsychology. He actually had a musicology degree. That's kind of where he came from. And he saw a lot of relationship in terms of creativity and where music actually comes from, but also how it can affect our altered states. Music can put us in different moods, but also in different altered states. And that can also enhance psychic ability or block it, for that matter. Scott was an encyclopedic memory person. I mean, you could ask, he read everything in the field. I mean, he read back over 100 years of literature. Whatever he could grab his hands on, he was always on top of things. Scott, essentially, if you said to him, do you remember what journal, what issue of, or which journal wrote this article about blah, blah, blah? You know, this particular case, if it was a poltergeist case, or this particular research experiment, he could tell you. He could tell you not only what journal it was, but what year it was, what month it was, or what issue it was, and sometimes even what page it was, which was kind of scary. Incredibly knowledgeable guy. Very prolific, wrote a lot of books. Yeah, not exactly like me. I mean, you could not, I remember things, but not as well as Scott did. He wrote a lot of books on a variety of topics in and around the field. Many of his books actually have been reprinted. I think a few more are coming out. There will be a book about him coming out from Cal Cooper at some point in the near future. I know Cal's been working on that as well. But definitely check out Scott Rogo's books. They're all great. They're all great to read. I don't know if his music book's in print though. So unfortunately. All right. Do you consider yourself a collector of books, and have you any that are particularly praised? So yes, I do collect certain books. I may have on the shelves behind me, I have some antiquarian books. I know that there's a lot of stuff blocking them, but I have a couple of bound volumes from the late 1800s of the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research. I've got books by Hereward Carrington, Frank Podmore. Actually, I have 2 editions of the book Apparitions and Thought Transference by Frank Podmore from the late 1800s, early 1900s. Those are kind of prized possessions. These books go for a lot of money now. When I was looking for them years ago, this was in the mid 2000s, to start picking them up, they were pretty reasonably priced in general. You know, 25, 30 bucks, 40 bucks. I didn't spend lots of tons of money on them. They go for for quite a bit of money now. And it was just at the beginning, kind of the beginnings of eBay. And I guess antiquarian books were not as popular at that point. So I do have those kind of prized possessions. There's a number of them. I'm trying to think what the most unique one is that I have here. Boy, that would really be tough to think of. I also have some reprints of some other books as well. But a lot of the books that I actually have here that are my prized possessions, are available for free on the Internet Archive. So one of the things that if you have not discovered the Internet Archive, if you have not, or even if you have and you haven't looked for these for paranormal books or parapsychology books, definitely check it out. It's archive.org, pretty easy to use. Just go to the text piece. The key thing is to the words you search for. So if you search for the word psychical, so psychic with an AL, that'll bring up a lot of the early books from the late 1800s into the early 1900s. You can put in the word ghost. There's going to be a lot of fiction that comes up, but a lot of nonfiction that comes up as well. And there's some really, I haven't even counted how many I've downloaded, but it's well over 200 books from that time period, and a lot of journals as well. So really very, very cool stuff. All right, let's see here. And I'll get back to my point here. The other point I was going to talk about. Do you know if the apparition of Lois is still haunting the house? I do not, Paul. The last time I talked to anyone from the family was around 2004. So, and she was there at that point. I don't know if they're still, if Pat is still living there. I don't know if the family still owns the house. And my guess is that if they moved, either Lois went with them or Lois moved on, or waited for the next family to come in. Who knows? For those who don't know, this is one of my major cases. One of the cases that really convinced me that apparitions really represented somebody, not just information. And it's written up extensively in a book called Surviving Death by Leslie Kean, Kean, as well. So let's see. Do you have any books of Persinger? I do not have any books by Persinger. I'm not sure what books he actually wrote. I have a lot of journal articles that Persinger either authored or co-authored with folks in the field, like Stan Krippner and I think he did one with Charlie Tart and a few other folks. And that's Michael Persinger, for those of you who don't know, who did a lot of work on geomagnetic fields and psychic ability, and also how geomagnetic fields affect the brain as well. I do have a book called Where Science and Magic Meet by Serena Roney Dougal, which is about the same kind of the research about geomagnetic fields. She took a slightly different path in that she looked further at how what part of the brain might be really affected, and it seems that she found that the pineal gland was affected by shifts in the geomagnetic field, which of course in most mystic traditions the pineal gland is the third eye. It does regulate melatonin and serotonin in the bodies, so our body clocks and some other things. So that may be what the connection actually is. But it's interesting that we see a correlation with changes in the Earth's magnetic field and our abilities, various psychic abilities. We also see how it affects the pineal gland, and mystics have always thought that that was something special. So that's kind of an interesting thing, especially since, and this is where we always have to remember that science changes, and science is a process. It is not just a set of laws and rules and facts. Science does change as new information comes in. The pineal gland was thought not to have any function whatsoever. It was like the appendix for a very, very long time. I think it was around the 1960s or 70s that there was some indication that pineal gland actually had functionality in the brain, or with what's going on in the body. It's not unusual for science to learn new things. Right now, there's a lot of discussion going on about whether dark energy, as it was first modeled back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, it looks like we may be wrong about what that is altogether. There's a number of things in cosmology and astrophysics that do change quite a bit. There's also changes that are going on. I just read that there was someone who has generated electricity using the Earth's rotation. So, and that's been theoretically possible. It's interesting to see whether or not this is real. And there are a couple of other really interesting things going on in science and technology right now, which are basically baffling people. And if they're real, we will have to change what we know about the way the world works to some extent. Um, and hello from Berkeley to you. Or I should say hello to Berkeley. I do want to mention, I noticed I do monitor news feeds through the company I work with, LexisNexis. And there was a spate of articles this past week or so about the Stargate program, about remote viewing, about the government programs, most of which were completely like inadequate or inaccurate. There were a series of them talking about Project Sunstreak and making it seem that was completely different than what eventually became Stargate. Sunstreak was actually one of the many names that the Stargate program actually had in its early inception. It was not any different than it was a remote viewing experiments, a remote viewing program. And it's really interesting to see people writing stuff up. And it looks like they're repeating. It's not bad information because they did talk about government psychic research, but it's just really weird that it came up in this context this past week. And there was also another one, which I actually am going to check out with my colleague Ed May, who was the program director of Stargate for 10 years. There was one, there have been some really odd reports of remote viewings that were done. One in which apparently Sunstreak found, this was the key, Project Sunstreak found the Ark of the Covenant through remote viewing. Not that anybody dug it up. I have never heard that. This apparently is one of the declassified CIA documents that's up there. I have to ask Ed, because he was with the program since about 1975, whether or not anybody did that, if there was really even a remote viewing, and or whether it was somebody was just kind of playing around in the remote viewing group at that point. How do you feel about crossing over souls? Very strongly that we should not go in and force anyone who is sticking around as an apparition to cross over if it's not their time, if they don't want to. It's really they may have been AI written articles. That's very possible. I'll have to check into that. So back to the question about crossing over souls. I know over the years, the psychics I've worked with, including Annette Martin, I worked for many years with a psychic named Annette Martin. I worked with the other psychics previously. I've talked about this with some pretty important people in the psychic world over the years. If you stick around as a ghost after death, there's probably a reason on your part as to why you wanted to or were afraid to move on or just simply didn't know what to do next. It rarely is this unfinished business thing. Pushing them to the other side just because they're an apparition in somebody's house is totally inappropriate. Asking them to leave the house is a different story. And the reason it's inappropriate is because it seems that there is something about the individual who's stuck around that allowed them to stick around, because not everybody does. So there's one point. Point two, there likely is some environmental factor like geomagnetic fields we haven't been able to figure out. But part three is, what if there's karma? What if there's a divine plan? And the plan is for this person to learn something while they're still here before they cross over. If you force them to cross over, you're going against the plan. I can't say that there is one, but if you were a ghost who needed help, it's one thing, because we have actually made it safe for them if they didn't know what to do. The number of times through the witnesses or even psychics, there have been a number of times I've heard Annette or another psychic say they didn't see the light. They didn't know where to go, so they're still here. Okay, the whole light thing, if you're looking for a light when you die, that's just as much pop culture as anything else. So what Annette and other psychics I've talked to just basically said to them, if you stop worrying about it and just say, I want to go, and just calmly let yourself go, you will go. You don't have to be crossed over. You will cross yourself over appropriately. So it's really, I've run into, Annette and I were actually verbally attacked by a couple women who told us we were at an event at the Moss Beach Distillery, doing an event there. They have a multi-decade ghost who people still refer to as the Blue Lady, even though she's not been seen in blue clothing for 30 years now, for a number of reasons. And we have some good information about her at this point. But she's having a ball. She likes being there. She likes seeing people. She likes interacting with people. And these two women were very upset with us because we didn't cross her over. And, you know, we're dealing with people here, dead people, but still people. And I feel, and Annette felt very strongly, that free will is important. And again, there's that divine plan thing. So you're kind of being a bully if you move them over without their permission. Again, if they're bothering the people in the house that they're existing in, there are ways through diplomacy, and there's other ways to get them out of the house. That's different than crossing them over. That's kind of an extreme step. So that's my response there. All right, so Tony, I assume, Tony, you heard about the Sunstreak stuff as well. Bill Carson, yeah, Bill Carson has no, if that's connecting to the Sunstreak stuff, there's no Bill Carson that has ever come up in any conversation or research or anything I've done with Ed or Joe McMoneagle or anything. You know, we co-authored a book on the history of the Stargate program, which started out as Grill Flame and then Sunstreak and then other programs as well. Stargate was just simply the last name for that particular program. The other thing that some of the articles actually said when they mentioned Stargate was that the CIA canceled it because it didn't have any actual operational effectiveness based on their study they published, they had done in 1995. That's actually a little bit of a misconception, and it's not an accurate statement. They did do that study, but they based that study on a limited set of remote viewings, not the entire history or anything else. And here's the actual thing about the remote viewing program for the government. There were 19 government agencies that consulted the remote viewing team. 17 of them came back again and again and again. And these were organizations like the FBI and the Department of Defense and the CIA and other agencies like that. Do you think that they would have come back multiple times if remote viewing didn't work? I mean, at the very least, you have 17 agencies that had customer satisfaction, or they had customer satisfaction with 17. So it's unfortunate that there were politics involved in 1995 when the program was shut down. A lot of politics. We have some of that story in our book, ESP Wars, East and West. There were a few other things happening behind the scenes that we've learned since then that were not in the book, but they are discussed in Volume 4 of the Stargate Archives by Edwin May, and Sonali Marwaha. These are 4 volumes. They're massive volumes of the best and some of the worst of the classified or declassified material, much of which has been unredacted, thanks to Sonali's detective skills. And they're not cheap volumes, but if you really want to know what went on in the program, Volume 4 is the one that kind of covers the entire program, but also the politics. So if you're interested in politics around this subject, that's the book to get, unless you want to read our book, ESP Wars, which I do recommend. Okay. Spirits of all, let's see. Just trying to make sure here that I'm not missing anything. I see that, what do you think about historical ghosts like the Flying Dutchman or La Llorona? Flying Dutchman, no historical, real, it's folklore. There's no real backup for this. La Llorona, the woman in white, the problem with that is that there's various variations of La Llorona in different parts of the world. just like there are variations of the hitchhiking ghost in different parts of the world. In fact, my colleague Kerry Gaynor, doing historical research, happened to find an incident of hitchhiking ghost in Roman times with a charioteer. So it's I couldn't tell you what that is. It's like the problem. There's a hitchhiking ghost story here in the Bay Area, in Niles Canyon. It's an area, an area that goes right through from to part of Oakland, from the East Bay, kind of like further out from Sonola is the name of the town, Pleasanton, Dublin, that area. And it's a very cool area. I mean, the Niles Canyon Road is a really cool thing to go through. A number of Charlie Chaplin's films were actually filmed there in Niles Canyon. And the town of Niles, little tiny town of Niles, part of Fremont, actually, not Oakland, but Fremont, is really a very interesting place to visit. There's a hitchhiking ghost story. There's no primary witnesses to the hitchhiking ghost of Niles Canyon. A friend of mine picked up this hitchhiking ghost. We hear a lot of these, a friend or I heard from someone else, that they never a firsthand witness in these circumstances. So it's always a problem when we're dealing with this, any of these things. All right. Some of them may be based in reality. So La Llorona might be based on an event that happened where a woman lost her kids or drowned her kids. I don't recall the exact story because it's varied in different parts of the world also. And they might have seen a woman in white. There's a story about the White Witch of Wildcat Canyon, which is a park between the town of Orinda and Oakland again, in the Berkeley Hills. And I know people actually who did see a woman in white walking along the road. Okay, so that's real. Don't know. I haven't heard much about that in years, but that was one. It's a problem in that when we have these bits of folklore, we don't know how much of the original story is what's carried through. There may have been an original story. And I'm going to give you an example. But before we do that, yes, Paul, it's like Resurrection Mary in Chicago and Desideratum. Crossing over should be a free will choice of that. But there are people who do soul rescue, and they force them. All right, so back to the folklore thing. Tony Cornell, who was a 50-plus year investigator, veteran of even before. That's just when his book came out in 2002. He passed away a number of years ago, but he was continuing to do investigations. Tony Cornell was one of the incredible investigator, one of the first people to actually take electronic sensors and put them in one device back in the 1960s. And he told me a story. Actually, I think he told it during the lecture he gave, which is on the Parapsychology Foundation's YouTube channel. Just go to youtube.com. In the search bar, type in Parapsychology Foundation, go to their channel. There's a 2-part Science of Ghost Busting, kind of a mini conference that I did with Tony Cornell, my late friend Carlos Alvarado, and the late Hans Holzer. So, and Tony is absolutely worth listening to. So Tony was doing an investigation back in the 60s at an English pub where they had a ghost story, and people were saying the place was haunted, and he and a couple other folks from the Society for Psychical Research went and did the investigation. Interviewed witnesses and many locals. 2 things came out of that. One, no primary witnesses, no evidence there actually was a ghost based on the story. And number 2, the researchers, the investigators felt it's not a great story. It was not a really good ghost story when it came right down to it. So Tony talks about he and his co-investigators are sitting drinking pints of ale with a bunch of the locals at the end of this, and together they come up with a much better ghost story, which apparently became the ghost story that was told after that one session. And to this day, that ghost story is the ghost story that's being told as the real ghost story. So it doesn't take much to change a ghost story. Let's put it that way. Have you ever encountered a trickster spirit type of entity, something archetypal rather than individual? I have not, but in some respects, while it's not an external entity, poltergeist cases are kind of a form of trickster phenomena. They can be chaos incarnate, breaking things, moving things around, or they can actually play tricks on people too. But that is the unconscious mind of one of the living people that's there. I've had also an experience. There's a place called the Banta Inn out in Tracy, California, back in the 80s and early 90s when I was doing a lot of just kind of doing a lot of visits and a long-term investigation there. We had physical phenomena happening all over the place. That was an evolution of the activity from the bartender owner manager Tony Gukin, who died in 1968. Uh, he was seen a lot. He was identified by people who knew him. He was identified by photograph people who didn't know him over time, and eventually physical things started happening. And even the first time I was there, uh, which was in the morning, late in the morning before they opened up, I was there actually with Hard Copy, the TV show Hard Copy, which was a magazine news show back in the 80s. And at one point, after interviewing, we did interviews with the owner, Joan Borland, and the bartender, telling their stories, and a couple other people. And then I'm sitting facing the bar in the cocktail area, and the director and the cameraman are facing me, and we're at one end of the bar. Other end of the bar, Joan and the bartender. No one in the kitchen at the time because it was before opening. So an ashtray, as they're interviewing me, glass ashtray, pops up off the bar, flips, full view of me, flips over and smacks down on the bar without breaking, very loudly. The director and the cameraman said, "What was that?" And Joan and the bartender are laughing. I told them what happened, and they said, "We didn't get it on camera." I said, "Well, you got the sound of the thing hitting." No, you didn't get it on camera. And as we're talking, a glass of orange juice slides across the bar like something from an Abbott and Costello movie. Over time, I heard lots of fun stories. Tony was absolutely a trickster for people who made fun of the ghost story. There were a couple of really fun things told to us. Joan was working there bartending herself one night when it's kind of a rural area out there, and there were some Hells Angels in there, and their girlfriends came in to have beers, and one of the girlfriends of one of the Hells Angels goes into the ladies' room, and she comes running out, and she says something to the boyfriend, who marches into the ladies' room, and he backs out slowly, gets the group up, and they leave. We never found out what happened in that. But I'm putting it on Tony as having had, a little fun. The other one, which really I love, is that there were two guys sitting at the bar one day when Joan again was bartending, and they were just basically calling people idiots and gullible, and you made the story up, all of that. Now they had a couple of beers in front of them. They had paid cash, so they had change, coins, and bills in front of them. Apparently each paid with a 20. So there's quite a bit of money on the bar. And at one point, the quarters in front of each of the guys, there's a quarter in front of each of them. What Joan described as she saw the quarters stand up on edge. And they saw that happen too. And they looked at her, and they looked down at the coins, and looked back to her, and they left. They ran out of the rest of the place, out of the Banta Inn, leaving all of their change behind. So it was a nice tip for Joan as it happens. So as tricksters go, I think Tony Gukin at the Banta Inn was a pretty good trickster, but not, I think, the non-human type of entity. But he definitely was a spirit. And I don't know if he's still there. I mean, they've had kind of lulls in the activity over the years. There were a number of other things that happened over time. I think in fact, I'll tell you a really funny story. Talk about trickster. We were doing interviews for 2 evenings. I had several of my former students from JFK University, and some other folks were with me. I had a psychic with me, Kathy Reardon, and I keep looking down because one of my cats is down here. And we're we gathered, we did, magnetic field reading. We did all the environmental stuff we did, but we interviewed a lot of people to get their stories about Tony, their encounters with the ghosts. Joan had let folks in the area know that we were doing that, so we interviewed a lot of people. And the second night, um, this is really kind of funny, but not necessarily related. So I'm also um, a mentalist. I perform as Professor Paranormal, mind reading type magic. And back in the 80s, I was doing comedy magic. That was before I became Professor Paranormal. So I was doing comedy magic back there, and Joan had asked me to do some magic for the customers behind the bar. So I'm doing that before 9 o'clock at night. We have a crowded bar. Um, I'm just kind of getting everybody going, and just around 9 o'clock, one of the folks there said, "Hey, if Tony's so active, can you get him to do something for us?" So I figured, what the heck? What the heck? Tony, give us a sign, and the power goes out. Not just in the Banta Inn, but all up and down the street. And I was stunned. There was stunned silence for at least a minute, and a guy comes running in from across the street. He was one of the firefighters who was in the fire paramedic station across the street. It says, power's coming right back on. Somebody hit a power line, hit a power pole with their car. We've taken care of him. So they had to cut the power for a minute, and it came back on like a couple minutes later. So just the timing was pretty amazing. Later that night, I was with most of the folks well after hours. So they had already closed up, I think around 1 o'clock. This is probably around 2:30, 3 o'clock. And we're just kind of talking about all the interviews. Joan and the bartender are still there. Kathy Reardon, the psychic, is out in the bar area with Joan and the bartender, and we're in the back in the restaurant. And at one point, I faintly hear some music in the background, and Kathy comes running back and says, "Hey, come to the bar, come to the bar." So we all go to the bar thinking maybe there's something going on. And there was. I listened. I looked over at the jukebox. The jukebox is playing Spirits in the Material World by the Police. And my response, I looked right at Kathy and I said, come on, Kathy. That's kind of silly. And she said, "No, look behind the jukebox." Now, first thing to know is I knew for a fact that Joan, when in the closing process of the bars, she unplugged the jukebox. So I looked behind the jukebox, and then I reached down and I come up holding the plug. There's no battery backup in this jukebox. It continues to play Spirits in the Material World until the very end of the song, and then the jukebox shuts down. So a lot of tricksters. There's a lot of stuff that happened with music, with people, with witnesses as well. But he definitely played around at that. Yeah, definitely a spirited ghost. He falls under. Oops, I'll let him out. Go ahead. Go ahead. He falls under the category of one of my favorite ghosts, as well. Have you ever heard of Telly Savalas? Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I actually met him briefly a couple times. He lived in the penthouse of the Sheraton Universal Hotel for many years. And my dad, who was a sports producer, he produced the international broadcast of the Rose Bowl and the Tournament of Roses parade. And for many of those years, my dad got the presidential suite, which was not the penthouse, but to use as an office and a meeting space for all of the appropriate television people who were coming into town. And we stayed at the hotel. And so you'd see Telly Savalas in the hotel quite often. I got to meet him a couple times. Never talked to him about his ghost experience because I didn't really get a chance to talk to him much, unfortunately. Would have liked to have heard about that. There's some really cool experiences. Elkie Summer had the actress, who many of you may not know, but she was another one who had some really great experiences over the years. And there are a number of outspoken people who have. There are some experiences that I question, like Kesha's experience, claiming she's had sex with a ghost multiple times. I kind of question that one, but I'm sure she had some kind of experience. Let's see here. I'll have to go to YouTube. I'll have to look that up on YouTube. I didn't realize that his experience was there on YouTube as well. Let's see. you need to go to the Banda Inn and the Queen Mary too. Yeah, the Queen Mary is definitely haunted. I don't know where they are these days with the special effects, but I think it's important to know for all of you that if you go on that they used to do a ghost tour starting in the very late 80s. It was like around 89 or 90. They had a regular ghost tour during the day of the Queen Mary, and there's definitely phenomena on the Queen Mary. There's no question about it. People, good witnesses over the years, all of that. But when I went on this tour, which was like probably 1991, with my folks, my parents were in town from New York. I flew down to LA to meet them. We went to the Queen Mary, go on the ghost tour, and there's definitely setup of special effects, sound, and it's kind of recreation. And recreations of some of the things that people had reported. I actually knew later on when in the mid 1990s, when the owner of the Moss Beach Distillery, which had decades of actual ghost experience stuff, he had asked me if we could do anything to enhance the experience people had because people always wondered about the ghost stuff. And so I found the person who actually did the effects at the Queen Mary. You know that they never once said that they had special effects in all the TV shows, even back then, who went into the Queen Mary, never once said that there were special effects going on there, which I always found pretty interesting. Not that they would have had the effects running when there was a TV, nothing on TV actually showed the effects as real in that way, as real stuff. But Queen Mary definitely has some really weird stuff going on, and to this day has some very unusual stuff. What advice or suggestions do you have for someone who has never had a ghost experience but really wants to? Well, go to number one, a place like a haunted restaurant, perhaps a hotel, or some other place where it's basically it's friendly ghost. The story is, it's not a horrible person. It's none of that. You want something kind of friendly, like the Banta Inn, and be open to the experience. And basically, you don't have to say this out loud, but mentally, hey, I'm here. I'd like to hear your story. I'd like to talk to you. Be friendly. Be very friendly. The one mistake that a lot of ghost hunting groups make is ignoring the interpersonal stuff. If you're dealing with an apparition, not a haunting, residual haunting, but an apparition, a consciousness, if they used to be alive, they were people. So be personable. Treat them like people. You will bring a little lighthearted humor into it. You're going to find that in approaching these places, whether they're residences or not, or places like the Banta Inn or the Moss Beach Distillery, if the ghost is around and you kind of catch their attention, they're more likely to interact with you, to do those kinds of things. We have had a lot of phenomena over the years, and it's mainly because my approach and from my mentors, people who taught me, was you want to be somebody the ghost likes, somebody the ghost will want to connect with. That's the key. Not yelling at them, not ignoring them in hopes of using EVP. You want to have a direct experience in that way. That's the best way to go with that. Also, take note of the fact that some places may have been haunted by an apparition, but may not be haunted anymore. The apparition is not, if that is a person, they don't have to be there when you're there. They may be busy doing something else. They also may leave and go to the other side because they've said it's my time, I'm going to move on, or done something else. So just be personable. I will tell you that I did a little ghost conference in the Gold Country here outside of Sacramento a number of years ago in the town of Jackson. It was actually Jackson and Volcano. It's a little tiny town next to called Volcano. And we were staying at the St. George Hotel in Jackson, which is definitely haunted. And the attendees were going to be doing the typical, something I don't ever do, turn all the lights out in the hotel and try to do EVP and use your devices and all that. I'm not interested in doing that. So I retired to my room, and as they're about to start, before they're going to start, I'm just getting ready for bed. And I just out loud said, hey, those folks, the folks who are here, do me a favor, please give them a show. And I had a pull down shade, which I had pulled all the way down. Well, I should take that back. It didn't pull all the way down at that point. I hadn't quite gotten that far. It pulled down on its own and then flipped all the way back as soon as I finished saying what I just said. I said thank you. And from what I heard from actually a psychic who was with them, the next day she told me there was a lot of activity throughout the whole thing. I said, yeah, well, just have to be nice. And she knew that too. Susanna, when I had the experience of the lined up coins in the hotel where I worked, I thanked them profusely and how wonderful it was. Yeah, it doesn't take much to freak people out, but it also doesn't take much to make us feel good that we saw something really interesting. And I think that's really the case here. Come here. Hang on a second. All right. This is Jake. And Jake is getting a little frisky today. Okay. A little squirmy. Anyway, it's always interesting when little things happen, which are often more interesting than big things. At the Banna Inn, Tony, when he was alive, used to, it was an old cash register. They had the same cash register, not an electronic one. And when he was alive, he would keep the drawer open. I bartended myself through college and grad school. And there were a lot of times that I knew bartenders who were just keeping the drawer open in various bars because they were so busy. It made no sense to actually keep opening and closing the drawer. So he would keep the drawer open. And what I was told by one of the regulars and the owner who knew him was that he would line the change up. So he'd make it neat. So one of the things that would happen is that in the world of the Banna Inn, when I was going there as an investigator, they would just toss coins in there. And if they closed the drawer and then opened it up a minute later, the coins would be in nice, neat rows. So we tried that multiple times after asking Tony to play with us. And yes, indeed, that actually happened. So there was no device that could have done that in that register, by the way. When a haunting of a location is a stone tape kind of situation, not a sentient individual, can that be cleared? Okay, so first of all, I know the stone tape theory, but it's not necessarily limestone or ferrous materials. Limiting it to that, it's too limited. There's more likely a connection to the Earth's magnetic field, the geomagnetic field, or some other magnetic field present that records information. So that's pretty much what it is. But yes, that can be cleared. There's a number of ways you can clear that. One of the easiest ways is with intention, not sage, intention and good vibes if you want to clear something out. That works really well. You can have a party. You can have people think of their happiest memories, play some good music. That helps right off the bat. You're kind of recording over the negative that's there. But you can also try using, all right, so I'm going to tell you honestly, no idea why this works. We have noticed in some of the residual hauntings, the stone tape, if you want to call them that there often is an anomalous magnetic field that can be registered on an EMF meter that is in the spot where people are experiencing the phenomena, the replay, because it's a replay of living people's activity. So my colleague Pamela Heath suggested that maybe if it's connected to some kind of magnetic field, maybe we can change the magnetic field. So she suggested, and I did, getting a degausser, or back when it was, when Radio Shack was in process, when they existed, it was called a bulk tape eraser. It looks like an iron, like you'd iron your clothes. You plug it in, it's an electromagnet, very powerful. You would run it over video cassettes or audio cassettes, and it would basically clear them. It would erase the tapes. We tried that in a couple of cases where there was a magnetic field recorded, unusual, even with the power off, and people were having an experience picking stuff up and turned it on, waved it around, moved it around quite a bit, and turned it off, checked the magnetic field reading, and for whatever reason that was gone, and the people didn't experience anything anymore. So since that time, still have the degausser, but I've taken to getting these small neodymium magnets. So they're very powerful, and I think I have a couple somewhere here. Maybe not. Must be in the other. They're in the other room. Um, here's one coin size you can buy, but I get these little ones that are either cubes or just much smaller cylinders. Very powerful. You can attach them to a lot of different things in a room where there's in a place where there's this kind of activity. The one thing that I would say to be really careful about, because there's actually now some real safety warnings about this, is that you should never do that in a house where there are little kids or dogs or cats. Because if a child swallows one, or human swallows one, or an animal swallows one, it can be fatal. They're so powerful in that way. So what I've done sometimes in these homes is if there's a light fixture above, I put them in a light fixture, if it'll attach to a light fixture. If there's like a filing cabinet, it's just got to be out of reach, just someplace out of reach. If there are no animals or kids, you can actually find the nails on the baseboard and just put a few there. That has worked. And then there's also the possibility that psychics have been able to do cleansings or clearings using their own psychic ability to clear out the energy, more or less. And that is not that hard. It's really about intention. You can do it. You can do it whether you burn sage or not. You can do it by imagining bad juju, bad energy in the room, and mentally picture yourself or mentally have some way of clearing that out. I have done it once myself, to the surprise of a couple of people, a couple of psychics. What I did was, because the room it was in was a kid's room, and the kid was a Star Wars fan. There were Star Wars stickers all over the room, and I mentally waved a lightsaber around to clear out the bad energy. And I left the room, didn't tell anybody what I did. And one of the psychics walks back there, comes walking out and says, "What'd you do?" And it was pretty much cleared. So, and all of us have psychic abilities. We can all do these things as well. So there's a lot of different things one can do. Resolutions are available. Actually, if you pick up my book, Hauntings and Poltergeists, which came out in 2005, it's not the best written book. It was edited badly, but it gives you some good ideas on how to deal with that. For that, or take my course on investigations, because we talk extensively about those kinds of things. All right, we're at the last minute. Thanks everybody for being here, stimulating me to bring some memories up of the Banta Inn and some other places. And the Banta Inn is written up extensively in my book, A Paranormal Casebook, second edition, which came out last year, which will be an audiobook within the next 2 weeks, probably by the end of the week, if I can do everything tomorrow. But thank you everybody for being here. Thanks for your participation. Please tell your friends. Remember to subscribe, but share this. Just trying to get the word out to folks. Remember that if you've not been here before, or even if you have, past shows have been recorded for over a year, and they're all available. And a big kudos to my producer, Graveyard Grog, for handling all this for us. So thank you, everybody. And I wish you all a good couple of weeks. I'm back on April 13th. Take care. Bye-bye.